Okay, language revitalizers. It's great to see you. Uh, I want to talk about burnout. So I found this image and I was sort of thinking about this stuff because we're always tired. There's always seemingly more work to do than people to do it. There's sometimes there's fighting, sometimes there's a whole bunch of other stuff that I think can contribute to this sort of burning out and going to find something else to do, which maybe doesn't require so much intense energy all the time. So I thought I would start by just saying, I'll just ask you folks, what are you doing to practice self-care and to make sure that you're not burning out? I'm just curious.
I don't know. One of the things I did with midterms was tried to plan ahead to get some things started so it wasn't a huge load at the end. But then when it got down to the deadlines, I would say to myself and usually a friend, okay, I'm going to give myself 1 hour to finish this, and whatever I turn in is just going to have to be good enough. And that was something that sort of helped me turn in the papers instead of staying up all night burning out on them. But that was one thing that
Yeah, like sort of setting time limits sometimes for how much you work, I think is important. And then, yeah, like academics is really interesting to me because you have these sort of stages and these ways that things get done. And I always question that, but then I sort of tend to fall back towards it as well, which is do a midterm, do a final, do a midterm, do a final. And then as we sort of venture into teaching, like, and these are big things that we're going to have too, is like, can we structure this whole thing different? Or does that always have to be the same thing? Which is always interesting to me. And I like the jokes about the pictures. I was like, just found this picture and I thought it was pretty fun. Other thoughts, ideas, strategies?
Well, a couple things that I started to do this year is um, try to look at my health and well-being a little bit more holistically, and started to do yoga every day starting in January. Kept it up. I've been keeping it up for most of every day this year. I probably missed maybe 2 months total, so like maybe 60 days, but it feels like almost every day. And then also just continuing to eat healthier, eat less sugars, just really basic stuff. And then also to start each day with setting my intentions of how I want to show up and be and what I want to focus on. And I think the other big piece though for me, which is complicated, is just trying to be okay with whatever it is I feel like is the most important thing for me to focus on and do on a daily, but sometimes on a weekly basis. And it means that I've become much slower at responding to email, much behind in a lot of the regular deadlines that I used to be really good at meeting. And a piece of it is kind of and being okay with that with myself and just saying, hey, it's okay because you're making these decisions on what the priority is for you right now, which for me, it happens to be the language and culture. And so that the rest of the pieces of my life that have to fall apart in order to sustain that, those pieces will just need to fall apart then. And I have to be okay with that as I continue to hone my focus on, I think, what's most important. And I think that lesson came out of my time in Aotearoa at the Maori back in the 1900s when I stayed for 3 weeks with them in like many of their maraes and visited lots of their schools and kuangareos and things like that. And I remember the story that was consistently there was that they had to give up everything else in order to become second language speakers of the language and educators and curriculum developers. And that really made that cultural renaissance happen. And I guess my big shift this year has been from talking about what the what the Maori did and what the Native Hawaiians have done to just doing that very same thing, which is following their footsteps and dropping essentially everything else and recreating a focus on language and culture as the highest priority. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I do think that it's been very, very hard. And it's almost like a process of decolonization from my perspective, of kind of letting go of all those things that Western society has deemed so important. And it's funny because I think about some of our elders and how like they don't really respond to emails and they don't do stuff. And I'm like, wait a minute, am I just like heading in this direction of just like not really engaging as much in kind of the Western systems and structures? And if so, then that's also okay. I just want to like recognize that like, that's kind of the direction that I'm heading in. And the challenge, of course, in today's world is like, how do you still make a living while doing that?
Right, right. It's funny when you said in the 1900s. It sure seemed like a long time ago. And then it just reminded me, I was watching this documentary about these people, Anasazi people who lived on these cliffs, in the Southwest. And in this documentary, they said, we actually found someone who's a descendant of them, and we're going to meet them at the cliffs and talk to them about like their people. And it's this camera crew, and they're all white people. And they said, so we decided to reenact, I don't know what they're doing, but they got into like a covered wagon and went and had horses draw, and like it took us 6 hours to get there. And like the guy pulls up in like a Suburban. It was so funny. But I use a lot of humor. I use a lot of humor and a lot of distraction, and I also figure out a lot of times to sort of not work, and not like the majority of the time, but like I think the other thing that we have today is like that email can always ding, and that you can look at your phone. It's so easy to just jump right back into work, and so I have pretty clear times, like put the kids to bed and then lay around for a while and watch a show. I just finished the Wu-Tang show. I thought it was very good. And then I just sort of find stuff that's gonna just distract me because I'm always trying to solve the problems and think of the things that what's the next thing we need and the next and this other stuff. And then I gotta sort of put my mind at ease, and I'll do creative stuff as well. Like so I'll make some artwork or I'll write something, and then that tends to help a lot to sort of get out of this other space of continually trying to figure out how to bring languages back to use, which we need to do, but I think you also need to find ways to rest your mind. Other thoughts? And I love the idea of being physically active. I play hockey too, which is fun because you can be so mean to people, and everybody's having a good time. Just pushing each other and hitting each other sometimes with a stick or hitting each other's stick. It gets so aggressive, but it's kind of fun too because you can look at them and smile afterwards. Sometimes it gets a little out of control, but 99% of the time it's all fun. What else?
Une, when you talk about doing something else and just getting away from the work for a little bit, that's part of what I do. I've gotten better over the last couple of years of allowing myself to, when I'm home, to be home and focus on just what I have here at home. And so like my Sundays are all about my family, and it used to be work always bled into Sundays, but now I'm pretty good at keeping those lines drawn. And I find myself, now that I do that for myself, I'm very cognizant of when I might be crossing that line with other people. And because a lot of people will call and talk and want to discuss things with me outside of during a time that would be their family time. And I'm always trying to be cognizant that we're having this conversation, and I try to get a feel for what's healthy for them. So that's just been something that I've used to help me feel more energetic as I get older. But there's one thing that's really small, but it's big. And it's how I start my day. And I do something in the morning that makes me feel accomplished before I even start my work. So, and I learned that if I do something as small as make sure my bedroom looks like it's the nicest place for me to return to later on, or my kitchen sink is sparkling white, I just, I get a sense of accomplishment at home before I try to walk into a stressful day. And it just helps me return to that space later on, and make that my space later when I need to turn things off and draw the line and focus on something different.
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah, that's fabulous. And yeah, just letting people know when you're not available. There's sometimes folks who they've always got something for you to work on, right? And so if you just add it all up and all these other committees and stuff, like it's okay to say no. And it's okay to recognize like when you're getting full, and it's also okay to spread out the work and to spread out the recognition. One thing that I do notice is that a lot of media groups and other they want to find that one person to be the voice, and like really just pushing all the time for plurality, and so having good representation, and also like there's a tendency I think to gravitate towards sometimes a male voice and stuff, and so it's like, well, we got lots of people doing lots of things, and so probably 10 years ago I wasn't as good as catching some of that stuff, and there'd be some snazzy article like seeking one person seeks to do, and it's just like a movie headline or something, and it's like, yeah, it's actually way more complicated than that. And so and just sort of keeping the team together and sort of finding ways to I also want to reiterate what Yvonne was saying, which was trying to eat healthier and trying to get active, get out on the land if you can, because I do think we're also presented with these kind of, there's so many different technologies that want us to stay in one place and to just consume the technology in this cyclical manner. And then next thing you know, you're sitting in one place, and then you're feeling a little burnt out. So then you get some kind of salty snack, and then you wash that down with some kind of sweet drink, and then you do this whole sweet salty cycle for a long time, which can, it could be yummy, but if you're not careful about, this is how I am anyway. So if I'm just sitting there working, trying to get some project done, I'll just keep eating and drinking, and then I'll have some coffee, and then I'll be getting dehydrated, and it's just sort of, it kind of adds up too. And so we got a dog last year, and that really helped, because then the dog's got to walk every night, so I could walk that dog and chase it around. We got little games that we play, and it's really fun, and it keeps me kind of active, because if you're in it, you got to do this for probably another 30, 40 years, which is you got to make sure that you're there. You got to make sure that you're taking care of yourself, and also finding ways to let go of some of these stresses. Like I caught myself the other day talking about this thing that happened at our workplace that I've been upset about it for a long time. But then as I was talking to someone, I was like, that really happened 6 years ago? It's like, maybe I need to let it go and just sort of move along. But sometimes you gotta do that too. It's just know when to let go of something. Any other thoughts?
I will real quick. I was just thinking that that's probably one of the first times I haven't felt like that. That was me too. And it's interesting that for me this year, I'm actually jumping in the way that Yvonne said, he's jumping and doing it instead of just talking about it. So it's actually been energizing by actually jumping into the language, speaking, talking, and starting to get in that. In the same way, for me this summer, finally being home and working on Ugruk and doing the traditional things in the modern time. And the mix, speaking in Upiat through Zoom, and going home and working on Ugruk in the modern sense. It's always really draining, but at the same time, it's really fulfilling and uplifting. And so I just find it interesting that this time in this space, I didn't relate to that computer person, burnt out folks, because I get to play in the language and learn it and finally feel some sense of accomplishment. And finally, as I was speaking, I finally was able to go to church this week, and two different elders start, usually every time they would talk to me, I would just smile and almost understand. But this time I actually think I understood everything they said, and I could even respond back. And so, and I think it really comes from that balance and being okay with which parts are just ignored and set aside for a while. I felt like seconding almost everything Yvonne said. So anyway, that's me, the enjoyment of the work and having the work be the thing that uplifts you instead of drags you down. And so for me in this time, if it continues the same, it might, start to get heavy again. But right now it's holding me up.
Nice. And we are entering our Selaktana, did you have a thought?
Yeah, I think it escaped me. It was definitely off of what Suzuki was sharing, but it may come back. It had to do with uplifting and working together, and something I've learned lately, but I can't quite pull it back out again.
Yeah, okay. Sorry if I interrupted you or your thought, but yeah, and some of these things as well. Like I've been trying to focus on, like as I analyze people that I work with as well, um, sometimes I think, and these are sort of things you have to be cautious about who you share this information with. But I tend to have sort of an internal monitor on when I need to sort of um, resist the energies of certain people. If they're always just kind of uh, if they're always talking about like what's not working and what's ineffective and just sort of just want to blast everything. Like I used to sort of dip into those discussions as well, but and I'm not saying you shouldn't analyze stuff, but there's this sort of it's a lot easier to sort of talk about what doesn't work instead of sort of making something work and then creating things that do work. And so to try and create these collaborative atmospheres where you're just keeping the thing going and you're saying, where's the blanks? I want to fill in the blanks. Because I always try to avoid the conversations where it tends to lean towards this, well, we would, but, and then you just want to go through this laundry list of reasons why you can't do the thing. And so I almost want to write a poem that's like, if language revitalization was a simple task, and sometimes I feel like there's a group of people who are sitting inside and saying, hey, let's go walk over to that tree. And I was like, okay, yeah, sounds good. And then so you get up and walk over the tree, and next thing you know, people are like, where are you going? Like, well, we said we're gonna go walk over to the tree. Oh, we're not ready. We're gonna get ready to go walk to the tree, but we got to get ready, so we're gonna do a study to figure out like how we might get to the tree, and then we're gonna go get some grant funding so that we can come up with a plan to go walk to the tree, and then we're going to, well, we don't even know how to walk to the tree, right? And so there's all this stuff about like kind of avoiding to do the thing, which I'm always interested in. I'm not interested in being in that situation, but I'm interested in analyzing the stuff. And especially when we talk about building entire language networks, where, if you really want to take this path of starting with a language nest, building a kindergarten, building, ideally, you're going with this first group of kids, and those group of kids are taking you all the way through the PhD program. So when those kids are 25, you have a PhD program in your language. Like that's a big part of how they did it in Hawaii. They didn't just sort of open the doors to this huge thing. Okay, we got to build a first grade, okay, and then that means you got to build teachers who are going to be either taking the group ahead or staying behind, and then also continuing to build this whole network that's going to function. And it might require some difficult conversations, like saying, okay, it's got to happen here, but that means these other things have to happen in these other places, and then they become the satellites of the bigger thing that's happening. And those might be difficult conversations because some people want it to be over here and not over there. And a lot of it is a resource question. Where do you have the speakers, and where do you have the teachers, and where do you have the administrators who are going to help the thing to really go? And how can you do it so it doesn't sort of systemically burn out and become this sort of smaller thing, that English gets to still be the thing, and this is something that sort of goes, and then they switch over at some point. So like I like to think about this stuff too, because then the second question, I guess, well, the first one was, what do you do? And then the second thing is, how can we help each other? What can I do to help make your life easier? Today, I was sitting there, and last night I was like, We only got 3 more readings to go in this class, like 3 more sets of readings. But this is the time of the semester where I get tired of reading stuff. I'm like, I'm tired of reading the stuff. And so today I found myself every time I sat down to read and to finish the article, I was getting very distracted. I was like, I don't want to sit. I want to sit here and flip the page. I don't want to do the thing. So I found this app. I think it's called Natural Reader, and it just reads it for you. And I could just sort of shave and do stuff and walk around, and it was interesting to me too, because I'm like, there's like a robot who's reading to me about decolonization. It's like, it's weird, but it was actually kind of nice to sort of just be able to move and just listen to it, and then I could watch the text go by as it went by. But I think it was worth it. So just trying to find things also to sort of say, there's ways that, there's a danger to that too, because then you say, oh, well, it's reading and I'm listening to it, so now I could do the dishes. And now I could type this letter. And now next thing you know, you're not even listening. Right? So, but I do think it's helpful sometimes to take a different approach if you're always doing the sort of same approach to whether it's your schoolwork or your day-to-day work or your language materials development. Okay, any other thoughts on this? What can I do? Anything else I can do to help you?
This is Sonny. You know, my granddaughter, she had a serious head injury, so she can't watch too much of Zoom. And so too much is just, she'll space out and she just can't handle it. So what I've been doing is reading it out loud. And so that's been helping me with the readings, because it's more like, okay, I have to do it because my granddaughter can't do it. And so it's not like I have a choice, but I guess she can get other people to read it. But in any case, in my reading it to her, I am getting a second chance to go over what I already read earlier, but that helps me, just reading it out loud and taking notes and keeping it, just kind of explaining it and simplifying it. Because sometimes we just get so busy and it's just easier to just explain it to somebody. But that's what I'm doing.
That's wonderful. And yeah, I think that is you're helping her, and then you're also helping yourself. And then I think taking a different approach sometimes is so beneficial. Like, even if you always do it the same way, then even just sort of, and I do this to my language classes too, is I'll just sort of, we've got this pattern. And I think there's a comfort in having a pattern. But then sometimes you got to sort of disrupt the pattern just to sort of, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to burn new brain pathways, right? And so I think sometimes at a spiritual level, I think I believe the things that I've been told, the path has been made for us by our ancestors. But then there's also these sort of physical things you have to do to be able to think completely in the language, so you're not translating any longer. And so, yeah, and if there are other things that you think would be helpful, always reach out and let me know. And these could be, especially like if there's particular terms or other things that we keep encountering in some of these readings, and as we sort of turn the corner into November, and I've had lots of, I've been having Twitter jokes all day, things like, if you give us the land back, we'll give you health care and a month where we can celebrate all of your people's heritage. And, I've just been having fun with stuff like that. But as we sort of turn the corner into November, like the semester's going to wrap up pretty fast. We've got 5 weeks left, and that includes our final class meeting. So I want to make sure that we're able to sort of answer the questions that you might have. And if we're not, we'll go find some people who can help us too. And then as we sort of continue to think about this course and other courses in the future, like the bottom line is like, how can we continue to build this solid network of language nests, language programs, language schools in Alaska, so that there's, every time you do this thing, it doesn't feel like you have to start from scratch. Okay. And yeah, I noticed in the chat as well, as someone who's enrolled in the class, you have a lot of things that you pay for and that other students pay for through their fees, and some of those include opportunities for support services academically, with counseling, and then also a number of other things. And then as we sort of think about what could we have and what would really help us, and to sort of think of continuing to develop more statewide offices and sort of entities that really assist with this, I think an annual conference, and then if that conference were to happen, there could be some components that are part of that that help us with some of these things. So thinking of this most recent reading and then starting to sort of tie in some concepts from a few of the other readings that we've done recently, I thought I'd start with this. And I know we've touched on this a number of times throughout the semester, and this is a running theme. And this is given, we also need to start thinking about what your final project is going to be. And it's probably going to be a paper. But I think it should basically answer this question, and which I'm going to ask you right now. If we are collectively successful, what is different 30 years from now? Like in the year 2050, what do things look like in terms of our languages and our programs? What do you think?
I think for Shamalia that if we're successful, then we'll have a lot of documentation and a lot of recordings for our grandchildren, so they can hear the pronunciation and the documentation of our Tao, our stories, I think. And they'll be raised with it. Our children will be raised with our language.
Yeah, preferably as first language speakers, right?
I think there'll be jobs in Indigenous language education that aren't grant related, that their jobs, there's an economy that's around continuing our language learning and language teaching.
Just adding on to that, it would be nice if it was self-sufficient so that, again, they have lottery programs, and so that it just provides money, so it's not competitive, it's not based on programs or grant funding. It's something that's really just somewhere written in. Maybe it's every barrel of oil, we get a percentage of it, and it just goes towards language. And they do that in Canada. When they did their land claims, they get a share, and then they decide every year what they want to do with that money. Anyway, that's just what I read. But yeah, self-sufficient would be really nice. And for me, man, I'll be almost 100. I would love it if I had people to talk to and laugh with and just joke in the back of the community hall and telling jokes, just like I used to hear when I used to go to those gatherings as I was growing up. I often wondered what those ladies were talking about back there, because they were just having a ball. And I want to do that too. I just want to be able to chat with some friends and have it at home. So thank you. Goodness cheese.
Goodness cheese.
And so normalized that the few people who don't are the exception instead of the few people who do speak the language. I mean, just think how it would be, how powerful it would be if people are running for our tribal governments and we're the only one that didn't know the language, and that's a disadvantage to them, instead of being among the people who haven't taken that extra step to try to start learning.
Right. Yeah. So that you'd be like, oh, we got to use English. Oh, okay. Oh, how unusual. How fun, right?
And that we won't feel like we need to apologize for having to translate to English after, and feel impatient with hearing the native language first, that instead it's just impatient with having to translate to English on the few times that we're cross-regionally meeting or something. Skip over the English and translate to each other's languages.
Yes. Yeah.
I think 30 years from now, at least in a Gwich'in context, I could see us having about 6 language nests through 12th grade schools. And what that would mean is that because there's only one village and one school in each of our villages, is that there we would be shifting towards 100% of people growing up in the villages being able to speak Gwich'in. And then because one of the schools is already starting to be established here in Fairbanks, there'd be a group of Gwich'in and non-Gwich'in people too, of course, would be attending these schools, but especially here, probably here in Fairbanks is more likely than even in the villages. But that's what I think we're heading in that direction.
Yeah, right. So like as you watch the Aha Punana Leo, they had multiple locations, and so they could tell you the history of which one was first, and then the second, and and they could walk you through that history. It's very well known. When we were doing a language games with them, like we were doing like a Kahoot type of thing, and it was very fun. And I just noticed how many of the questions were geared towards making sure they understood the institutional history of their own language movement, which I thought was really fascinating. And then, yeah, so it sort of like you want the language nest is typically the preschool, and then the medium school is, basically you're gonna, and I think the strongest place, like if you're gonna have one stronghold, and every language is gonna be different. But let's say you had one stronghold, and in there was a language nest, a K through 6 medium school, uh, or a K through 5, is that how they do it now? And then a 6 through 8 medium school, and then a 9 through 12 medium school. So like basically dividing it between preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, and sort of saying like those categories are already there, but then that's sort of all your phases, and then there's somewhere that's teaching it, and that could be through higher education, and then it could also be an adult immersion program. So then what you might have is sort of figure out a strategy to say, okay, the stronghold communities will have all of these things. You can do a preschool all the way through 12th grade, but it could be that like exists here, then this other community has the language nest and a K6 school, and then this community only has a language nest, and so it's sort of like the language nest becomes sort of the basic springing board, because I do think they're all extremely difficult, but it's almost like a stepping stone kind of a phase, and that's one potential approach, and so you're also going to have to realize like we can't get it all now, but we can keep getting it, and then as we sort of learn how to do this, we can open another one, and as that one gets strong, then we can open another one, and then you're building this whole network of teachers that are doing essentially the same type of thing, and then hopefully, yeah, you can get that in multiple locations all the way up, maybe all the way to 12th grade. And as we do this, we're going to continue to have these conversations too, coming back to self-sufficiency, is it can't be a soft money program. It can't be something that relies on these grant funds while other schools and programs get to dip into the funds for education.
I think too, it will, in 30 years, our language programs, if they're successful, will include separate college classes for different areas of learning. And to explain, when I went to Japan for a year, I was a university student at Keio University, and they had me in a class for reading newspapers. There was a class for writing sentences and learning grammar. There was a class for watching TV shows, like understanding colloquial Japanese. And I think there was like a speech giving class. So like throughout the week, I went to all these different classes that were like specialized areas of focus for the language. And I think that would be included.
Yeah, absolutely. There's like Hawaiian botany classes, there's Yupik spirituality classes, and so as we sort of look, you could develop a whole series of these content courses, which is the really fun part is once you have those, you say, okay, we're not teaching the language anymore. I mean, we are, but that's not what we're here for. We're here to use the language and then to figure out like how do we fill these gaps? How do we, and for a lot of indigenous languages, you're trying to bring it back to some of these areas where, you know, it could be as you're looking at culture and entertainment, or if you're looking at art, or if you're looking at boat building, whatever the thing is, like the content changes, but then the thing is like to do this through the language. And it's a huge push in terms of like pushing people's fluency in language use. As long as it's not just like one or two people sitting there talking the whole time. Like, can it, can you find a way to make sure that everybody's being engaged and talking, which is, you know, sometimes when it comes to language teaching, you have to sort of force the issue a little bit, or else you'll have students who are, they're going through the motions and they're learning, but they're becoming passive speakers, which, you know, I'm not sure what the right term is, but they can understand the language, but they have such a hard time speaking it, or they can only do like these rote language tasks. Like I can do the things that I've memorized, but I can't do these other things, which is where the content courses really do help.
I think you always have to push learners from my limited experience, because otherwise a lot of people do just like to answer aha or aqua, yes or no. And they, you know, they're understanding you, but you're like, no, you got to conjugate the verb to first person and respond back to me in a full sentence with this question. Anyways, in my early stage of just a little few people that I get to work with, yeah, it's like that. That's an important part of teaching, I think.
Yeah, because you got to make sure that you're getting, you know, like in Hawaii when I was there, they said, go for the deep sea fish. And that was a phrase like as they came back and they did their annual week-long teacher training, they would say, what's our focus for this year? What are the things? And some of it was like developing a theme. So that was the theme of the year, was go for the deep sea fish. And then sometimes we were sitting around talking about just sort of day-to-day stuff, or sometimes like, you know, month by month, semester by semester, things that they needed to sort of continually improve. And similar to that, like if you go to the University of, if you go to Kahaku'ula o Ke'ilikilani, the College of Hawaiian Language, like you can, if you just want to learn Hawaiian, you could take it through the University of Hilo. That's how I understand it. And it's basically you take one course a semester and you can learn how to speak Hawaiian in a couple of years. And then there's these two books. So like there's book one and book two. Year one, you do book one. Year two, you do book two. But you're not considered in, you're not in the College of Hawaiian Language. You're just sort of a language learner. But if you're in their program, as in their bachelor's program, in their master's, or in their PhD program, and if you're learning Hawaiian in the program, it goes twice as fast. So we've been trying to mess around with stuff like that as well, and trying to, we're probably going to propose it next year, which means it would come into, it will come into rotation 2 years from now, which would be to take a group of students and they would be prohibited from taking any other college classes other than language classes. So they would be spending all of the first 2 years of their studies entirely in language courses. It's a resource question for us too, because someone's going to have to teach that class. And so it's going to be a combination of content courses like you would typically do. So we get together 4 hours a week and we teach the language. So you would be doing that, but then you'd be doing a whole series of other stuff that's sometimes group-led, self-led, other sort of teachers and maybe TAs who are in the program. But that way, the goal is to like, you know, like book one, book two, like I said in Hawaii, book one, year one, book two, year two. If you're in the program, book one is first semester, book two is second semester. Third semester, you're expected to be kind of done with English. And so it's a pretty aggressive program. Any other thoughts 30 years from now?
social media is, if it's still around, is inundated with all of our languages.
Right. Yeah.
And it's translated accurately by their machines.
Right. So you can enter something into Google Translate or Facebook Translate, and it doesn't just sort of put one word in there that's not even, it's like, is this Dutch? Right. And so, yeah, so that you can get those translations pretty quickly. And also you could have a Facebook interface or whatever the thing, Meta or Twitter or whatever the things, or Wikipedia. So you can have that interface totally in an indigenous language. Awesome. Let me do a quick check-in. Did anybody not have a chance to do a midterm yet? I think I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 folks have gone so far. So you're just supposed to show us something that you've worked on, some sort of language lesson, idea. You don't have to teach it to us, but you just have to show us what the thing is.
I haven't gone yet, Hune. Mine isn't really like a language lesson or even a language strategy. It's just my thoughts on teacher preparation in Northwest Arctic.
Great. Did you want to do that today, or do you want to do that? You ready?
I can do it. I can do it today if there's time.
Yeah, you want to do it right now?
Sure. Let me get ready to share my screen here.
And yeah, and we can have someone else. I see someone in the chat. You can go on Wednesday. Wednesday is also an option. But if you're ready today, you can go today.
Okay, let me see.
And let me stop my share. Okay, looks like we had 2 signed up for Wednesday. That was good. Three on Wednesday. Okay, so Wednesday's getting full up. Good.
Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So sorry, you guys can see each other too. Let me knock you guys down from there. Okay, so I spent a year and a half back home in Northwest Arctic and got to work as an assistant superintendent there for the school district. And what I learned about myself was even going back home wasn't close enough for me to language work. So because you do your full-time job as assistant soup or even a classroom teacher in a public school setting nowadays, and there isn't time left over to do language work when that's something that you find purposeful. So I've stepped back and now I'm doing volunteer work for our school district and helping just support our Inupiaq teachers back home every other week with some supports. And I've been talking with the superintendent and other language workers in our region about the key needs in our region for Inupiaq language revitalization. And the conversation always ends at, but we don't have the teachers, we don't have the people who can speak or who can teach. And so I've just kind of put some thoughts here that I will eventually share with some of the organizations back home that are hoping to further things along. So, so in our school district, we have 11 villages, 12 schools, and our Inupiaq language program currently in our schools runs from 30 minutes a day to 30 minutes a week. We don't have anything more than 30 minutes a day, and that's a lucky school. It'd be a smaller school with a full-time instructor, and the principal has been able to schedule that kind of Inupiaq language time for students at that school. But our larger schools have only 30 minutes a week of Inupiaq language instruction. And then the other current status of our Inupiaq language teachers in our district is that all of our type M teachers have retired. For us, that means our teachers, our speaker teachers, our teachers who could speak Inupiaq proficiently 20, 30 years ago. When I first graduated from college, our Inupiaq language instructor force had all proficient speakers who were steeped in Inupiaq cultural knowledge. They could speak, many of them could still speak what we call the high language, that some of the elders now who felt young then feel like they don't have the high language knowledge. Now our Inupiaq speakers that we are hiring as people leave and retire are teachers who aren't proficient in Inupiaq typically, but they have access to a family member, a mother who maybe was the Inupiaq teacher that just retired. They have connections in the community to and a motivation to learn Inupiaq when they take the job. The other thing that has impacted our school district is in 2008, one of our key language activists in our region and in the state for Inupiaq language passed away. And she had retired from the district, but not retired from the work. She had suddenly passed away, and that's Datkavin Ruthie Sampson. And so there's been a real slowdown in the efforts, maybe a lack of people with her knowledge, or maybe a lack of people with confidence. And I also think there's also been a time for honoring Datkavin too, that has come to, you know, be a part of the timeline here. We also have in our region, Nikechut, it has, it's an Inupiaq language immersion school that's operated by our tribe, the native village of Kotzebue in our hub village. And it's intended to have full day instruction, mostly due to the needs of working parents, not in support of an immersion model. So that presents challenges when our two teachers there have to teach all day, and they get in at 7:30 and the kids leave by 3:30 and they're exhausted, and the only time that they have time during the day to work and plan is 7:30 to 8, and hopefully when students go down for naps, and a little bit of time at the end of the day. So they're challenged. And but the one thing that we're really happy for in our region is that Nikechut worked to establish a curriculum a couple decades ago, and it's a strong curriculum that our region is pretty proud of and leans on it for resources. Nikechut was also supported in professional development through Datkavin's work at the school district, and so we've also experienced limited professional development for Nikechut since 2008. Basically, it comes down to we have a limited number of speakers who can also teach, and it shrinks by 2 or 3 people every year. So it feels like there's this need right now, an immediate need to start focusing on developing teachers in our region. We have some opportunities that I think we need to explore in our region about kind of developing that teacher pool. I am of the mindset that we'll have to go slow to go far, but there are some immediate opportunities that we'll need exploring. So one of the things we worked on this past year before I left was putting into the negotiated agreement something similar to a career pathway for our Inupiaq instructors to become certified teachers in the Inupiaq language. Our district used to have a robust type M certificate pool, but that pool and the work that our board approved for those teachers to get type M certificates really focused on the type of teaching staff we had available. So many of our teachers, when the type M certificate was a thing in our district, were proficient speakers who were steeped in the culture and knowledge, and really just needed to understand more about orthography and classroom environment and how to become a teacher of what they already knew really well. But we have that understanding that we've been there before as a district, and I think that's important for us to keep that foundation. We're also, we're also aware that LKSD has a type I pathway into certification that's uniquely used by their district right now, but I'm interested in learning more about that. We have the UAF Inupiaq program taught by Chelsea Zdebel, that she's from Norvik, from our region, and I think that's going to increase interest from our region to for students to come to UAF and learn the language. And we also have a partnership with Chukchi. The director at Chukchi has been reaching out to community members and other people in our district to find out what types of courses would support culture and language work. And I think that we can talk with her about what a new Inupiaq language certificate might look like for the current job pool that we have. And then I'm really happy to be taking this course because now I'm aware of resources for people who, I think for lack of a better phrase, want to do the work. Language revitalization is so broad, and there's so many areas that a person can choose to focus, maybe a pathway for themselves to support language revitalization, maybe with dictionary work or becoming a teacher. And this course is really, for me, pulled a lot of elements together. And I think that for my region, there are people who would be interested in language revitalization as a career path, as a way to be engaged in our own community and to give back to our community. So this course itself has excited me. I also, I think one of our other opportunities is right now, Nikechot and our tribes have expressed a need to develop additional language teachers. And it's something that's talked about often, like that's where we're at. We have all these places we want to go, but we don't have the teachers to support it right now. And the one thing that I keep reflecting back to people who are saying, well, where will we find the teachers? There is a growing number of young adults, both in our region or out of region, but they're Inupiaq and they want to learn Inupiaq, that their desire is to learn Inupiaq and to teach Inupiaq in some way and to pass it on to their own children and their families. Some of them have approached the school district and other entities in the region and taken on shorter term contracts. You know, they're a lot different than my generation. I walked into a career and kind of stayed in it until I left the Fairbanks School District and then just started doing different kinds of work. I was on a career track. Our younger adults aren't necessarily on a career track. They are on a purpose track. And the young people I work with don't see Inupiaq language learning in the same way I understood it growing up. It's not regional to them. It's not dialect based to them. It is bring all resources, all ideas, and let's build something and roll it out. And Suzuk is probably familiar with some of these individuals I'm picturing in my mind right now, because every once in a while they host a Saturday or a Sunday meeting and we all get together and we tool things out and create learning opportunities that are specific to what the collective group wants. So I know that there's a lot of interest by young people in this work. And so that we need to find a place for them to feel engaged and to, I think, make a living on this type of work. While I've been thinking about teacher preparation, I've reached out to some entities that are already doing this type of work. I reached out to Sealaska Heritage Institute, and I talked with the Alutiiq effort in Kodiak as well, because they just got an adult immersion, an adult immersion grant, and have just been trying to understand the work that's been done by people who've gone ahead. And so I think that in our region, we have to determine what types of models we would like to support, and then recognize that they all need teachers and we have to give it time to develop the teachers. I've kind of outlined some next steps just based off of readings and phone calls and discussions I've heard here in class. And so I think that our region we have yet to develop kind of a formal master apprenticeship. We do have young people who created those relationships for themselves, but we don't have anything that supports that as a job. It doesn't really support the learner and the elder yet in ways that are sustainable. We've had some language intensives, but we've always hooked them into other larger efforts. I think we can still continue to grow those out. What we don't really have right now going on with Inupiaq language in my region is information and knowledge on how to work with documentation, even in our, and then as well teaching strategies, even in the school district, like I mentioned earlier, just the professional development on teaching strategies really slowed down once ducks have been left. And then I also know that we have so many materials in our region and out of our region and here in Fairbanks at the archives. We are steeped in some really good resources from elders who use the high language and who really talked about some cultural activities that I think the interest would be high in bringing back to our knowledge level. And so I was also thinking that we needed to be looking at a program like the Breath of Life program in California about how we can use the resources available to us to help further our work. One of the pieces I'm also interested in, because we haven't done that yet, is developing a language proficiency assessment for adult speakers in our region. I feel like we have to go slow to go far, even if I'm a fast talker when I do these presentations. The energy that goes into this work needs to go deep rather than spread out among many. And we should be looking at right now where we're at, investing in a few learners to become teachers. And I think it would be much like the approach that the Elutuk Immersion House is going, and I might have the name of the project wrong, but I know that they're going to be starting an immersion house, and they will be investing in over 3 years 5 teachers to be developed through their grant. So that's those are just some of my thoughts on teacher preparation.
Fabulous. Anybody have any thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I'm just super curious about what you mentioned. There's two teachers there, and are they both first language speakers, or are they both just proficient speakers? And then is it full immersion for 5 days a week, or is English allowed in the space? And then how many students? And I know I could just talk offline about some of these questions, but they're like the ones that are ripe in my mind. And I do get excited because I think all of us are in a very similar place with having to figure out all these pieces of producing new speakers and new teachers. And our first intern, don't publish this on YouTube for at least another week or two, Hune, but please. But our first.
Thank you, Yvonne. Can you stop the recording?